There is a moment in every great story where you can feel the exact second things stop being fine and start becoming something much darker. For the Indiana Fever and their millions of devoted fans all around the world, that moment happened this week, and it did not happen the way anyone expected. It did not happen because of injuries. It did not happen because of fatigue. It did not happen because the opposing teams were simply better. What happened to the Indiana Fever this week was something far more disturbing, far more personal, and far more deliberate than anything a rival franchise could have engineered from the outside. What you are about to read is not exaggeration. It is not clickbait. It is a deep, thorough breakdown of the reported chain of events, the alleged decisions made behind closed doors, and the very real consequences that are now threatening to rip one of the most exciting teams in professional women's basketball completely apart at the seams. Multiple locker room sources, fan analysts with verified inside connections, and publicly observable on-court evidence all point toward the same deeply troubling conclusion. And once you understand the full picture, you are going to be absolutely furious. The Indiana Fever were not supposed to be here. They were not supposed to be a team in crisis. They were not supposed to be a franchise with superstars reportedly preparing to walk out the door. They were supposed to be a dynasty in the making. And they were, right up until the moment someone on the inside allegedly decided that winning was less important than control. The story of how a championship-caliber team gets destroyed from the inside out is rarely clean, rarely simple, and almost never talked about openly. But today, we are going to talk about every single piece of it. To understand how catastrophic this situation truly is, you have to understand what the 2026 Indiana Fever represented before all of this started unraveling. This was not just another WNBA team grinding through a mediocre season, hoping to sneak into a playoff spot. This was something genuinely historic in the making. This was a franchise that had been completely and utterly transformed by the arrival of one player and then accelerated into championship conversation territory by the addition of another. Clark entered the Indiana Fever and immediately did something that nobody in the history of the WNBA had ever done at quite this scale or quite this speed. She did not just improve the team. She did not just give them a solid floor spacing option or a reliable second scoring threat. She fundamentally redefined what the franchise was, what the league was, and what professional women's basketball could look like on a national stage. Her court vision was operating on a completely different level from anyone around her. The passes she was threading through defenses, finding cutters in traffic, orchestrating pick-and-roll actions from 30 feet out were the kinds of plays that made grown basketball coaches stop their film sessions and rewind the tape 3 or 4 times just to make sure they had actually seen what they thought they saw. Her long-range shooting alone would have made her a threat worth game planning around. But it was the passing, the decision-making, the ability to process information faster than the defense could react that made her the most dangerous offensive player in the entire league. She was not just scoring, she was dictating. She was controlling the entire flow and tempo of every single game, making her teammates better, making the offense more efficient, and making every player around her feel like they were operating within a system designed specifically to get them the best possible looks. And then Sophie Cunningham arrived, and the whole thing became something even more dangerous. Cunningham brought a dimension to this Indiana Fever team that pure offensive systems simply cannot manufacture through scheming alone. She brought a mentality, a raw, aggressive, unapologetically competitive mentality that the franchise had been missing for years. She was hitting transition threes off Caitlin's outlet passes that defenders had no prayer of closing out on. She was getting to her spots in the half-court offense because defenses had to respect Clark's penetration first, then scrambled to recover, and by the time they were rotating, Cunningham was already in her shooting pocket, pulling the trigger. And she was doing all of that while also bringing an edge to the locker room that made every single person on that roster understand exactly how the team was supposed to carry itself every time they stepped onto the floor. The combination of Clark's orchestration and Cunningham's instinctive scoring off that orchestration was not just effective, it was beautiful in the way that great basketball is always beautiful when it is being played by people who genuinely understand each other's rhythms and instincts. The arenas were packed. The television numbers were extraordinary. The cultural conversation around women's basketball had reached a level that the league had been hoping to achieve for years. Corporate sponsors were pouring money into the Fever specifically because of what these two players represented. Nike, Gatorade, major broadcasting deals. All of it was flowing directly toward Indiana because of the star power that Clark and Cunningham had built together. The team was winning, not just scraping wins together in close games, but actually controlling stretches of games against quality opponents, building leads, making statements. The playoff picture was becoming increasingly favorable. The third seed, a home game advantage, a genuinely realistic path to a deep postseason run. All of it was sitting right there, completely within reach. The only thing standing between the Indiana Fever and a legitimate championship run was the playoff bracket itself, or so everyone thought. Then came the losses, back-to-back, ugly, embarrassing in a way that went far beyond what the final score could capture. The kind of losses that make you tilt your head and genuinely question whether you are watching the same team you watched a week ago. The Indiana Fever stepped onto the court and looked, by every observable measure, like a completely different organization. The offensive rhythm that had made them so dangerous was completely absent. The spacing that had allowed Clark's playmaking to function at its highest level had evaporated. The energy, the intensity, the unmistakable feeling of a team that knows exactly what it is doing and why had been replaced by something confused, something stagnant, something that looked almost deliberately disorganized. Fans in the arenas were holding their heads. People watching at home were firing off tweets and posts at a rate that made these games among the most discussed sporting events of the week, not because they were great basketball, but because they were so shockingly, bewilderingly bad from a team that had absolutely no business being this bad. The comment sections, the forums, the basketball podcasts, everywhere the same question was echoing with increasing urgency. What in the world is happening to the Indiana Fever? The box scores told part of the story. The Fever allowed 30 points in multiple individual quarters. Their transition game, one of the most dangerous weapons in their arsenal when operating properly, produced almost nothing. Caitlin Clark, the player who had been functioning as one of the most efficient offensive catalysts in the entire league, was forced into situations where she was catching the ball in spots that do not work for her, in positions that remove her ability to make the reads and the decisions that make her so uniquely dangerous. She was rushing shots. She was forcing looks. She was visibly operating outside of the offensive framework that had made the team so effective, and the results were exactly what any basketball observer would have predicted. Poor shooting percentages, turnovers, stalled possessions that ended in contested jumpers instead of the kind of high-percentage opportunities that the Fever's offense is specifically designed to generate. And Sophie Cunningham, the player whose entire offensive game is built on receiving the ball in rhythm after Caitlin has already created the advantage through her penetration or her passing gravity, was essentially frozen out. When the primary offensive creator is not operating from the position that allows her to create those advantages, the entire structure downstream collapses. Cunningham was not getting her looks, not the open corner threes she had been burying all season, not the off-ball cuts that she reads perfectly when she knows where the ball is going. She was standing around waiting for something to materialize from a system that had been fundamentally altered, and nothing was materializing.
Meanwhile, the New York Liberty, not playing their best basketball by any stretch, still managed to win 109-102. The Chicago Sky were being discussed as a legitimate threat to beat this Fever team. Fans were openly saying that a first-round exit against a team like Golden State had gone from unthinkable to genuinely plausible. The third seed that the Fever had been building toward all season was slipping away in real time, and still, nobody in any official capacity was providing any explanation for why the team suddenly looked this unrecognizable. But then, the leaks started hitting the internet, and suddenly the losses made a completely different kind of sense. Here is where the story shifts from disappointing to deeply alarming, and it is critical to be absolutely clear about something before going any further. What is being reported here is based on alleged inside information from sources claiming to have direct knowledge of the Indiana Fever organization's internal dynamics. These are rumors, these are reports, these are claims from people identifying themselves as locker room insiders or individuals close to the franchise. None of this has been officially confirmed by the team, by Stephanie White, by Caitlin Clark, or by Sophie Cunningham. With that framing firmly in place, here is what those sources are reportedly saying. According to multiple individuals claiming inside knowledge of the situation, head coach Stephanie White has allegedly been in a state of serious personal frustration for weeks. The source of that frustration, as these reports describe it, is not the team's performance. It is not concerns about the playoff schedule or the injury situation or any of the standard coaching anxieties that come with managing a professional roster through a grueling season. The alleged frustration, according to these insider accounts, is specifically about credit, about recognition, about the perception, both internally within the organization and externally in the media, of who is actually responsible for everything good that is happening with the Indiana Fever. The narrative, as these sources tell it, goes something like this. Every media segment, every ESPN breakdown, every viral social media clip, every corporate sponsor announcement has been framed around Caitlin Clark and Sophie Cunningham. Clark's name is on the marquee. Cunningham's name is right next to it. The coaches, the system, the organizational structure that allegedly surrounds them reportedly gets almost none of the public credit for the team's success. And according to these inside accounts, Stephanie White's ego has allegedly been unable to absorb that reality without cracks forming. Rumors suggest that White was reportedly making comments internally about wanting to prove that the system was more important than the individual stars, that she, as the architect of the offensive and defensive structure, deserved recognition that she was not receiving, that she wanted to demonstrate in a tangible and observable way that she was the controlling intelligence behind what the Indiana Fever were doing on the floor, not just a background figure rubber stamping whatever Caitlin Clark decided to do with the basketball. It has been said that this mindset allegedly began influencing her actual basketball decisions in ways that prioritized making a personal statement over maximizing the team's chances of winning.
And if these reports are accurate, the basketball decisions that followed represented one of the most extraordinary cases of alleged self-sabotage in recent professional sports history. The specific decision that is at the center of all of this purported controversy is the one that every single person who watched the Indiana Fever this week noticed immediately, questioned loudly, and has been unable to stop talking about since the final buzzer sounded. Stephanie White allegedly decided to move Caitlin Clark out of the point guard position and install her as a small forward. She allegedly decided to have Aaliyah Boston, a center, handle ball-bringing duties and initiate the offense from the point guard position. And she allegedly did this not as a temporary strategic adjustment based on a specific matchup problem. She allegedly did this for extended stretches, reportedly for the first 3+ quarters of at least one of these games, as if it were the intended offensive structure going forward. Take a moment to actually sit with what that decision means from a pure basketball standpoint. Caitlin Clark's entire value as an offensive player flows from her positioning and her responsibilities as a point guard. The pick-and-roll actions that make the Fever's offense tick require her to have the ball in her hands at the top of the key, reading the defense, deciding when to pull up, when to turn the corner, when to lob it over the top, when to find the shooter relocating to the corner. When she is operating from that position with that responsibility and that freedom, defenses have to make impossible choices.
They cannot shade too far toward Clark without leaving the roll man open. They cannot help too aggressively on the drive without giving up threes. They cannot switch every action without creating mismatches that the Fever are perfectly equipped to exploit. Remove her from that position, stick her in the corner as a spot-up shooter, as the third option rather than the first, and suddenly she is dependent on other people creating the situations that allow her to catch the ball in rhythm. Suddenly, she is a role player in an offense that was specifically designed around her ability to be the creator. The skill set that makes her genuinely generational, the court vision, the decision-making under pressure, the ability to find teammates in spaces that other players cannot even see, all of it becomes essentially irrelevant when she is standing 20 feet from the ball, waiting for a pass that the current structure is not designed to deliver to her. And the ripple effect on Cunningham was equally devastating. Cunningham's offensive output depends almost entirely on Clark creating defensive attention first. Without Clark operating at the point, drawing help defenders, forcing rotations, creating the collapsing effect that opens the corner and the wing, Cunningham's opportunities dry up entirely. She is not a player who can create her own shot off the dribble from difficult situations. She is a player who absolutely punishes defenses when she catches the ball in the right spot at the right moment against a scrambled, over-rotated defense. Take away the person whose job it is to create that scramble, and Cunningham essentially disappears from the offensive equation. Fans and basketball analysts watching in real time were losing their minds. One widely shared tweet, labeled coaching malpractice by its author, described the absurdity of watching Clark hit 2 consecutive buckets to get into her rhythm and then immediately being substituted out, apparently because the rotation clock deemed it time for a change, regardless of what was actually happening on the floor in that moment. The pick and roll between Clark and Boston, reportedly one of the most reliable and effective plays in the entire Fever playbook, was allegedly nowhere to be found for the vast majority of the first half of at least one of these games. And when the coaching staff finally ran it toward the end of the third quarter, the results were instantaneous. Clark found Cunningham on a perfectly timed backdoor cut. The offense came alive, points came easily, the crowd responded, and then the adjustment was apparently abandoned again.
None of this looked like an accident to anyone watching. It looked like a system being deliberately suppressed. It looked to an enormous number of observers exactly like what the alleged insider sources were describing. The losses were bad enough on their own. 2 games that should have been competitive wins for a team with Indiana's talent level turned into damaging defeats that cost the franchise real playoff positioning and real momentum at the worst possible time in the season. But what allegedly happened after those losses, according to the insider reports that have been circulating across basketball media since the buzzer sounded, is where this situation escalated from a bad stretch to something that could fundamentally reshape the franchise's future. Reports indicate that the atmosphere inside the Indiana Fever organization in the aftermath of these losses reached what multiple sources are describing as a nuclear level of tension. It has been said that the film room, the place where professional teams typically gather to review footage and discuss adjustments in a controlled, professional environment, became the scene of confrontations that were anything but controlled or professional. Screaming matches, according to these accounts. Players reportedly unable or unwilling to contain their frustration with the decisions being made at the coaching level. The kind of behind-the-scenes conflict that, when it surfaces in a professional locker room, rarely stays contained for long. And then, according to the same sources, something happened that represented an extraordinary escalation. Rumors suggest that Clark and Sophie Cunningham did not just complain to teammates or vent to their inner circles, they reportedly went directly to the front office. They allegedly walked into meetings with the Indiana Fever's organizational leadership and made their position explicitly and unambiguously clear. They are done, according to these reports, playing for a coaching situation that they believe is deliberately working against their success and against the team's ability to win games that matter. The specificity of that alleged message is striking. These are not 2 players asking for minor adjustments or requesting a conversation about the offensive system. According to the insider accounts, this is two franchise cornerstones telling ownership and front office leadership that the current situation is untenable for them, that they have reached the end of their tolerance for what they reportedly view as deliberate suppression of their abilities, and that they are actively considering their options. The phrase demanding a trade has appeared in multiple reports, though it is important to note that no official trade request has been confirmed by any party. What was observable on the court, however, added a layer of credibility to these behind-the-scenes reports that made a lot of basketball observers sit up and pay attention. Sophie Cunningham's body language during one of the losses was being dissected extensively on social media, with many fans pointing to specific moments where she appeared to deliberately route the ball to Caitlin Clark in a way that felt like a rejection of the established offensive hierarchy she had been placed within. One fast break sequence in particular, where Cunningham caught the ball in transition with what appeared to be an easy scoring opportunity, and instead immediately fired a pass to Clark, was interpreted by many viewers as a very deliberate, very public signal about exactly where her loyalty and her basketball philosophy actually lie.
Whether these on-court moments represent deliberate acts of protest or simply the instincts of two highly competitive players who trust each other implicitly is impossible to say with certainty. But in the context of everything being reported about the internal dynamics of this franchise, they are difficult to view as simple coincidence. Here is the part of this story that the Indiana Fever ownership group and the league executives are almost certainly losing sleep over right now, because this is where the reported internal drama stops being just a basketball story and becomes an economic crisis of genuinely significant proportions. The financial architecture of the Indiana Fever franchise as it currently exists is built almost entirely on the foundation of two names, two players, two human beings who, if these reports are accurate, are actively contemplating removing themselves from that foundation. Think carefully about what the Indiana Fever looked like before Caitlin Clark arrived. The arenas were not sold out every night. The television ratings were not breaking records. The sponsorship dollars were not flowing in from Nike and Gatorade and every other major corporate brand that suddenly decided professional women's basketball was worth a significant investment. The national media coverage was not generating the kind of cultural conversation that makes a sports franchise feel like something bigger than just a team playing games. None of that existed, or existed at anything close to its current scale, before Clark changed the entire financial landscape of this franchise and, arguably, this league. Sophie Cunningham's addition amplified everything further. The two of them together created a product that people genuinely wanted to watch, wanted to attend in person, wanted to buy merchandise representing, and wanted to follow obsessively across every social media platform. The loyalty that the Indiana Fever's current fan base feels is not primarily to the franchise logo or to the organizational history. It is to the players. Specifically, it is to Clark and Cunningham. And the fan community has made this abundantly clear across social media in the wake of these reported trade rumors, with the message being consistent and unambiguous. Where Clark and Cunningham go, the fans go. The Indiana Fever name without those two players is not a draw. It is not a product that fills arenas. It is not a brand that Nike writes checks to associate with. The corporate sponsorship implications alone are staggering to contemplate. When Nike invests in the Indiana Fever, they are not investing in Indiana. They are not investing in the organizational infrastructure or the coaching staff or the franchise history. They are investing in access to Caitlin Clark's image, her platform, her fan base, and the cultural moment that she represents. Remove Clark from the equation, and that investment loses most of its rationale overnight. The same logic applies to every other major sponsor currently tied to this franchise. The moment the players who make the product valuable disappear, the money follows them out the door. The WNBA's national broadcasting deals, the prime-time slots, the crossover media coverage that has been making the league more visible than it has ever been, all of it has been driven to a significant degree by the star power of players like Clark.
A Fever team without its marquee players reverts almost immediately to the pre-Clark landscape. Smaller audiences, local coverage instead of national, empty seats where sellout crowds currently stand. The financial regression would not be gradual. Based on how rapidly this fan base was built around specific individuals, the regression could be nearly instantaneous.
Reports indicate that the ownership group and the league's executive leadership are aware of all of this. They are reportedly in active crisis mode. The phrase "sweating bullets" has been used by multiple sources, describing the conversations happening at the highest levels of the Indiana Fever organization right now, because they understand that they are not just managing a coaching controversy. They are managing a situation that could, if it plays out in the worst possible direction, functionally end the Indiana Fever as a commercially relevant franchise for years. Which brings everything to the moment that the Indiana Fever organization is currently living through in real time. The moment where a decision has to be made, and where the wrong decision carries consequences that no amount of future maneuvering can fully undo. The front office, the ownership group, the league executives who have a stake in keeping the Indiana Fever viable and commercially successful, all of them are reportedly staring at the same two options, and neither one of them is clean. Option 1 is the decisive, immediate response. Terminate Stephanie White's contract, remove her from the head coaching position before the situation deteriorates any further. Begin the process of repairing the relationship with Clark and Cunningham by demonstrating in the most concrete possible way that the organization's loyalty is to the players who built this franchise into what it currently is. Bring in new coaching leadership that is committed to running the offense through Clark's strengths, maximizing Cunningham's output, and building toward the playoffs with the system that actually works, rather than the alleged ego-driven experiment that produced these catastrophic losses. It is a drastic step. Firing a head coach mid-season during a playoff push carries its own set of risks and complications, but it is a step that would send an unambiguous message about where the franchise's priorities actually lie. Option 2 is to stay the course, to back the coach, absorb the drama, hope that the reported tensions can be smoothed over internally, and trust that the competitive drive of both Clark and Cunningham will override their frustration when the playoff games actually begin to matter at the highest stakes. This option is quieter. It avoids the chaos and the narrative storm that comes with a mid-season coaching dismissal. But if the insider reports are accurate, if Clark and Cunningham have genuinely reached the point of exploring trade scenarios, then staying the course risks allowing the situation to escalate to a point where no reconciliation is possible. And at that point, the franchise is left with a coach who allegedly prioritized her ego over winning and no superstar players to show for it. The basketball world is watching all of this play out with an intensity that reflects just how much is actually at stake in this moment. Because this is not just about the Indiana Fever's playoff hopes, as real and immediate as those stakes feel right now. This is about something larger. It is about what happens when organizational dysfunction allegedly reaches the level where it threatens to override the kind of generational talent that comes along once or twice in a sporting era. The WNBA has spent years building toward the kind of mainstream cultural moment that players like Caitlin Clark represent. The idea that internal mismanagement could squander that moment, could drive away the players who made it possible, is not just a franchise-level tragedy, it is a league-level catastrophe.
Every fan who has ever watched Caitlin Clark thread an impossible pass through a closing defense, every basketball observer who has ever appreciated the way Sophie Cunningham punishes a defense for rotating a half step too slowly, every casual viewer who tuned in this season because someone told them the Indiana Fever were actually worth watching, all of them now find themselves holding their breath and waiting to see whether the people in charge of this franchise are going to make the right call before it is too late. The clock is ticking. The postseason is approaching, and right now, in the hallways and conference rooms of the Indiana Fever's front office, the decision that will define this franchise's future is reportedly being made. whether it will be the right decision, whether it will come in time to keep the team's two brightest stars from walking out the door, whether the organization has the courage to make the move that the situation clearly demands. None of that has been answered yet. But here is what has been answered. What the Indiana Fever had this season, when it was working, when Clark was running the offense from the point guard position with Cunningham hunting her spots off the ball and the entire system humming at its highest level, that was something genuinely special. It was the kind of basketball that makes people fall in love with the sport. It was the kind of chemistry between players that franchises spend decades desperately trying to manufacture and almost never actually find. And the idea that someone allegedly chose to throw all of that away, not because the system was not working, not because the players were not performing, but reportedly because one person's ego could not tolerate sharing the credit for something beautiful, that is the part of this story that is going to stay with everyone who followed it long after the final resolution is reached. The Indiana Fever are standing at the edge of something. Whether it is the edge of a catastrophic collapse or the edge of a crisis narrowly averted, that depends entirely on what happens next. And whatever happens next, the basketball world will be watching every single second of it. The players built something worth watching. The question now is whether the people running this franchise are going to protect it or whether they are going to let it burn. This script is based on publicly available commentary, fan analysis, and reported speculation. Allegations regarding coaching decisions and internal organizational dynamics are unverified and should be treated as rumor and speculation unless officially confirmed by the parties involved.